Next from Chicago, we talk with the author of Greeks in Chicago, which lays out how the Greek community grew in size and influence over many decades, and how they merged their culture into the American experience. This runs about 15 minutes.
Professor Michael Davros, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And you came out with a book called Greeks in Chicago. What can you tell us about this?
Well, it's photo history, and it starts early um, before the 20th century. So it's about 1888, and it catalogs the rise of Greeks from that portion of the 19th century through the 20th century, and it ends about 2008. And one of the things that's interesting about the book, I was originally planning to stop at about the 1960s when Greektown slowly began to diminish in its prominence in Chicago. And then as I started talking to the publishers, and I said, well, there are a number of prominent Greeks that came after the 1960s. I said, would you like to hear about maybe Paul Vallis or some of the other interesting Greeks? And they said, well, just go ahead and write the book and include all those people that you wanted. So it ended up being really a catalog from about 1888. I think that's the earliest photograph till about 2008. So there's lots of really fascinating photographs. I like to point out some of the ones that are meaningful. We have a lot of horse cart pictures. So I could have written a book just on a collection of horse carts, and it's fascinating because the fact that mostly young men came, and when you got a horse cart, you had made some progress because you were no longer standing on the street selling stuff. Okay, we're not long on your foot. So the progress from standing on the street to then moving to a horse cart and then moving to a store. Now you made it. Okay, you had a storefront. That was progress. So, in terms of the kind of mercantile influence from the beginning of the century, that's where Greeks, I think, established themselves here. It's the really strong work ethic, the faith that they had, the fact that they needed to earn money to send it back to Greece because there were a lot of kids. A lot of men came who had families still in Greece. Many of them were unmarried sisters. So it was very common for mostly men to be in this country, and then little by little women started arriving, but it wasn't very common for a lot of Greek men to have their sisters or wives very early here after their arrival. So it's really kind of a fascinating history.
Let me ask you, we know, of course, the Polish are huge in Chicago.
Sure.
How large of a enclave of Greeks are there in Chicago?
Oh, it depends on how political you want to be about it and how patriotic you want to be. Tim and I were talking about it before we really started sitting here and selling books, and I think we could probably make a claim for about 165,000. And today, but don't forget now, we can make a claim for even a larger number of people because of the fact there have been intermarriages. So who claims Greek ethnicity? That could be going back 2, 3, 4 generations. So the numbers might be very much higher. So, if you want to call 250,000 an adequate number, I think that's a reasonable number. And that includes not just Chicago, but the collar counties, because after in the 50s and 60s, when Greek towns ceased being an entity, those people moved out first to Lawrence and Western, and then they moved out to the suburbs. So if you want to call it a diaspora from the original Delta, that could be a larger number. But notice the number of churches in the suburbs. Those churches have a large population. And for example, the church that I attend, or the church at St. Peter and Paul, these are composed of a large number of families that have intermarried. So it's not just Greeks. It's a variety of other people who have composed current Greek population. I mean, you could. I mean, I was talking with my colleague here earlier, and Rita Wilson, who's we're not talking about Greeks in Chicago now. We're talking about Greeks national. Rita Wilson's an actress. She's married to Tom Hanks. Well, Rita Wilson is Greek. Well, Tom Hanks converted to Orthodoxy, so it's you figure out who's considered Greek. We have Greek by accusation or Greek by association. So I think people want to be Greek. I mean, let's face it, okay?
Well, we know Greektown in Chicago, and you got some decent restaurants. How strong is the community, and are there festivals, and aside from the restaurant, what kind of, how does it manifest itself today?
Well, Greektown, for the most part, is restaurants now, and that's Halstead from Van Buren to Adams or something like that, and so that's kind of a restaurant role. There are, I think, about 1,500 Greek restaurants in Cook County and Chicago, so this is huge. Festivals are constant throughout the summer. We begin in May and June and go all the way through August. So there are some times when we have multiple festivals going on, and we try to keep one July festival from competing against another one. So conceivably we might have a festival on the north side and maybe one way south. We try not to kind of engage in those kind of conflicts. The conflict a lot of times, for example, that my church has is the Taste is going on, or some other Chicago festival that has nothing to do with ethnicity. So.
But the community at large still gathers and comes out of the woodwork, so to speak, for the...
Well, yeah, I said everybody wants to be Greek. So, it's at that time when, you start reconnecting with your oregano and your olive oil. So.
Now, what... And by the way, the Mediterranean diet has been very helpful now.
You know that. Everybody, look at... Okay, go to the grocery store. About 5 years ago, you'd go to the grocery store, you see Dannon yogurt. I don't know if Dannon's Greek or not, but now you go to the grocery, and Dannon had, okay, can we see this on camera? It's a large number of feet devoted to the dairy case.
Right.
Now Dannon is squeezed into a small place, but everybody has some kind of Greek yogurt, okay?
And it's very good.
And oh, by the way, my father-in-law, my wife will tell you, had this idea 30 years ago, but that's a different story. But everybody's kind of think. I mean, it's funny. No matter that we've got a tremendous Greek, crisis in Greece, we still want to be Greek.
But in the larger context,
Sure.
So the Greeks came, like many other immigrants, and it established themselves, got a toehold, and grew, and it's the same as we sometimes see now with the Hispanic community, the Cubans, the Mexicans, and the whole rest of the Chinese out in San Francisco. Do we know why Greeks, I mean, not that they haven't settled in other places around the United States, but was there anything that in particular drew them to settle in Chicago and that from that community, that group?
Sure. I've had that question asked before, and I don't really have a really good answer, except for the fact that Chicago has been settled by about 55% of the people of Greek extraction who settled here came from two particular prefectures. One is Laconia, which is the site for that is Sparti, and the other one is Nomos Arcadia, which is the state of Arcadia, and the center for that is Tripoli. So it's from those two Peloponnesian states that gave the largest amount of population here. So it may be, my villager friend knows so-and-so, he's in Chicago. So it might have been sort of interpersonal relationships that guided people. I once gave an explanation that I thought it was the railroads, but I don't know that that's at all true. I think it was perhaps much more nearly something like an interpersonal relationship. My cousin is there, therefore I have to go there. So when my father came here in 1922, he came here because his cousins were here. And this was a fairly common kind of experience, I think. So.
I was going to say my grandmother came over from Germany because her sister had already landed in St. Louis.
Well, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
You're going to go where people know you. Right. My father had no family in New York, where he originally landed, so he made his way west.
Now, The book again is Greeks in Chicago. Why? What motivated you to put the book together and write it, and how long did it take you to put together?
That's a good question. I had a friend of mine who wrote Swedes in Chicago, and I got angry. I got upset. I said, where's the Greeks? He said, well, why don't you call this company? So I called Arcadia Publishing. They said, well, we don't really have anybody who's doing that right now. Do you want to do it? And I said, well, I certainly would like to do it. And I got in touch with the people, with Alice Copan, and her husband Andrew had died just shortly before I took over, and they had originally had a contract with Arcadia Publishing, and that contract had expired, and so Alice and I formed a relationship. We had a discussion. Steve Frangos, who's a journalist working with the National Herald, also was involved. And so it became kind of a labor of love, of looking at the photographs that Andrew Copan had collected over the years, and the photographs that were available from a number of other people that I contacted, and in my collection as well. So there were about 1,000 photographs that finally we were selecting from, and about 226 finally made it. But it was, I think it was a desire to get the story out, to get it told. I think there's a great deal more left to be told. One of the things that happens when you get a project like this, you go, okay, I'm done. And I go, oh, no, that really isn't quite all of it. So there's plenty more to be told, and it's not just in a particular singular collection. It's not just in the collection of the National Hellenic Museum or whatever a large number of pictures are left with the Andrew Copan collection or a number of other collections around. But I think, too, this is kind of a place, the book gets to be a place where we can all kind of get together. So there were hundreds of people who were involved in my gathering these photographs. So I would drive up to Wisconsin and spend some time up there with people who owned one of the restaurants here. Fascinating thing, once the call for photographs went out, I got photographs sent to me from California. Oh, I don't know. Greeks in California, Greeks in Chicago. What's that got to do with, what's one thing got to do with the other? Well, it's interesting because of the fact that the Tremulous family was living in California, but they had their roots here, and they had their roots in automobile design. It's fascinating things that were going on in automobile design, and finally, and then there's a picture in the book about with Alex Tremulous and how much he was involved in aerodynamics. And those aerodynamics finally made it into something called the space shuttle. It's kind of interesting that these very small little things in history are actually can be magnified and seen in larger contexts in somewhat more meaningful ways. It's not just some guy with a mustache, running a restaurant. It's what his children do, and what is the foundation that he sets up for his kids.
In many ways, I was going to say we see it over and over, not just with Greeks, but it's the story of America.
It's absolutely the story of probably every immigrant group. Every immigrant group has come here and contributed a great deal. So, it's very hard for us to say, well, this other immigrant group should not be part of the American landscape or the mosaic, if you want to call it that, or gumbo, whatever, or salad, whatever metaphor you want to use.
Our Professor Michael George Davros, thank you for joining us, and it's Images of America, Greeks in Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.